We are right now in a proxy world war where only the Russians are directly involved of the three big players. Now the Americans are being dragged into direct involvement against Iran. And the big geopolitical threat has always been Russia, China, Iran as a combination that dominates Asia and becomes an enormous challenger to the West. If the Chinese wanted to fully back the Iranian regime, they can do a considerable amount of damage.
Right. Morning, Firas.
Morning.
We have another war.
We have another war.
Another fucking war? Oh, God. Okay. I don't even know where to start with this. Just tell me what you thought, because we had the rumors in the week building up that Israel were going to,
Yes,
considering strikes on Iran, and then it just happened.
yes.
And I kind of felt like it came out of the blue. I know there's these ongoing issues between Iran and Israel. It's been going on for decades. Iran wants to destroy Israel, but I still kind of felt it came out of nowhere.
So the reason that feeling is justified is because the negotiations between Iran and the US were ongoing, and they seem to be going well enough. The strikes began on a Friday, at dawn on Friday. On Sunday, the Iranians were scheduled to meet with the Americans, and everybody was relatively positive about the possibility of an agreement. Plus, the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, had said that the Iranians were not working on weaponizing the uranium. Now, there's a complicating factor, which is that the Iranians are enriching at 60%. This is below military grade, but also doesn't really have civilian uses. There are some situations, I believe, an older Iranian reactor was running on almost military grade uranium, but that was in the days of the Shah. And it no longer runs on uranium that is enriched to that level. So there was no clear civilian purpose to do it. The Iranians have been using the enrichment issue in order to extract concessions and to force people to negotiate. These negotiations seem to be going well. The Israelis found successful negotiation and diplomacy to be an unacceptable outcome because they just wanted Iran destroyed. If you wanted to sort of choose a good starting point, it's the Wesley Clark video where he says, he's a former head of NATO, where he says that after 9/11, a decision was made by the Pentagon to go after 7 countries in 5 years. Now, these countries were Somalia, Sudan, Libya, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Each of those countries has been either like Somalia, subject to continuous American involvement, or like Libya and Syria, collapsed with the regimes replaced, or like Sudan, partitioned, ended up in civil war. The last one standing is Iran. And if you think of Benjamin Netanyahu as the unofficial leader of the neoconservatives, he is one of the most successful politicians in America because he's managed to get the United States to intervene in each of those conflicts and in each of those countries. And the neoconservative plan to wreck these countries has succeeded, but instead of taking 5 years, it took 25 years.
So the plan to wreck these countries is that chaos is better than an organized dictatorship?
No, it's that these were countries that were consistently hostile to Israel and sponsored terrorist attacks and insurgent groups and militant groups opposed to Israel, and therefore they needed to be destroyed. Now, I'm not sure how Somalia fit into this. Sudan was a conduit for some weapons via Iran and had an Islamist government that was deeply committed to destroying Israel. And so the Israelis have gone through the ring of countries around them and using the United States military's capabilities have succeeded in that objective. even when a country like Libya had decided to sort of reconcile with the West and repent for its past, paying compensation, inviting Western companies to participate in its economy, etc., it wasn't enough. And we saw, in Libya's case, Bernard Henry Levy playing a pretty large role in convincing the French to go into this war, and then Obama went ahead into it anyway.
By the way, Connor, can you try and find that Wesley Clark video?
Yeah, I'm trying.
The thing to sort of remember here as well is that George W. Bush ran against Al Gore, criticizing the Clinton administration for being too interventionist and too heavy-handed. He was criticizing them for their intervention in Serbia and in Bosnia to try to partition Serbia, to partition Yugoslavia, which had already broken apart in a civil war. And George W. Bush was advising restraint. And he ended up in Iraq and Afghanistan, hardly restrained policy options.
And Trump has criticized the neocons, and now he's being accused of being a neocon himself.
Before we get there, Obama ran against stupid wars and said that his foreign policy objective was don't do stupid shit. This is what he said. He ended up supporting the overthrow of Assad, which actually happened after his administration, but the Timber Sycamore operation, which armed the jihadis in Syria, was critical in leading to the overthrow of Assad. And he ended up going to Libya. And we're still paying for Libya in terms of migrant flows from Africa just going into Europe. I know Syrians whose plan was to go to Libya so that they could hop on a boat and get to Italy. So there have been consequences of each of those decisions. And a president that comes in promising restraint usually ends up failing to deliver it, with the exception of Trump 1, where he did kill Soleimani, the leader of the IRGC Quds force responsible for building those regional networks, averted a war, didn't actually go into a war, and that was it. Aside from that, pretty much every American president has gotten himself fully involved in a war. We saw Joe Biden going to Israel after 7 October and on at least 2 occasions, I believe, sitting down with the Israeli war cabinet. This kind of integration, I mean, I don't think it's normal for a foreigner to sit in your war cabinet.
Nope.
I don't think that's standard.
I don't think so.
But this is where this is where part of the story has to begin.
Okay.
That there's always been this objective to destroy Iran and to absolutely wreck Iran. The other countries on the list
Do you want to put your headphones on? We can watch it.
Do we need headphones for it?
Yeah, they're just on the end of your mic.
Sure.
How come we used to play it without it?
Yeah, because it's all going through the same feed now.
All right.
And Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz, I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the joint staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today. And he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years." starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
You can stop there.
Jesus, so Iran is the final piece.
So Iran is the final piece of this project, and it's not that they didn't know what they were doing and that their response to 9/11 was to go around and invade a bunch of countries. It's that there was something called the Project for a New American Century, which, after the end of the Cold War, saw that the remaining problem was radical Islam. And so to defeat radical Islam and terrorism, the countries that were seen as sponsoring terrorism or having movements that were, in Lebanon's case, heavily involved in terrorism, should be taken out in order to establish the sort of permanent peace that allows America to govern for a century.
But that's objectively dumb.
Not only is subjectively dumb, it's also wasn't necessary for America to govern for another century.
But if you want to,
it served the interests of Israel. It in no way served the interests of the United States. It was clearing the neighborhood around Israel from its prospective enemies and its potential enemies that could one day conceivably in the far future do something more rather than just random terrorist attacks.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to defeat radical Islam, you don't do things that radicalize people.
That's a very good point.
So Israel is essentially lobbying the US to topple the regimes it fears.
Yes, but in doing so, this is an incredibly reckless policy, because the country that is coming out empowered in all of this is Turkey, which has moved away from any kind of secular government that wants to integrate with Europe and turn Turkey into a European country, and has chosen a pathway whereby it becomes the leader of the Muslim world.
Yeah, I mean, and Erdogan is a dictator, and he's aligned with Putin.
I don't like... I mean, we use the word dictator and conflate it with the word tyrant. I like to make a distinction between dictator and tyrant. A tyrant is somebody who is ruling absolutely arbitrarily, with no method to the madness. What I say is law, and tomorrow I'm going to say that your shirt is not white, it's black, and everybody will have to go ahead with it. You could say that about Bashar al-Assad, in the way that when certain people were being tortured, they would be made to say that Bashar is your God. That's tyranny. That's biblical tyranny. Erdogan is a dictator in that he is the only one with actual decision-making power, and all power is delegated from him. But he isn't a tyrant. He's expressing the repeated wish of the Turkish people to return to Islam.
Yeah, I mean, look, I haven't called him a tyrant. I called him a dictator.
Yes, but because these two terms are confused, I just wanted to sort of set out that distinction.
And there are no free elections in Turkey anymore.
No.
And he arrests and imprisons and possibly tortures journalists. There's no free press in Turkey anymore.
No.
I've been out to Istanbul. I went during the migrant crisis they had themselves, because they're the gateway to Europe. They have a lot of migrants there, and there was the time when Erdogan got sick of it. He moved everyone to the border with Greece. I went up to the border and watched it.
Yes.
I entered a migrant camp. It was fucking crazy.
Yes.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, he's the only decision maker in Turkey, and the person who succeeds him will be exactly like that. Remember, it was only through a free election that Erdogan got into power. There were a couple of more free elections that he won. And then when he thought that he was going to start losing elections now, he figured, well, that's the end of free elections.
Hold on, Connor, weren't you in Turkey during the coup attempt?
Oh.
Yeah.
That must have been wild.
I was far away.
Okay.
He was on a beach. Still, I'm worried. My children are in Turkey during a coup.
Understandably so, of course. Of course. So this war wasn't in any meaningful way necessary. The Iranians have been flirting with weaponizing uranium, but the assessment of American intelligence was that it wasn't happening anytime soon.
And it's used for leverage.
And it's for use for leverage. And Obama fully fell into this. He gave them concessions in Syria and in Iraq and in Lebanon in exchange for the nuclear program being severely constrained. Trump decided to walk away from that deal. He was negotiating a deal that looked similar. They'd keep some kind of civilian capability, but the Americans wanted the Iranians to have zero control over enrichment, which is reasonable enough in some ways, in that does guarantee that the Iranians can't move to a nuclear weapon, which was also something that the Iranians could never accept, because the whole purpose for them is to have full autonomy over the nuclear cycle from beginning to end.
Okay.
And they view that as a sovereign right that they have. The Iranians are signatories of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which sort of stops you from doing this kind of thing. But they're not particularly good signatories, because there were often cases where they were building facilities in secret, only for them to be discovered much later. And these facilities were going to be used for enrichment without anybody being notified in advance. From the Iranians' position, it's understandable, because if they gave advance notification, somebody would bomb it.
Mm-hmm.
So they got into this tangle with the international community, and they thought we could use this to extract leverage, or we could use this as leverage to extract concessions. They were getting close to a new agreement. The Israelis decided, we have a veto on this. And they went to war. And the talking point has constantly been, well, the Israelis aren't asking the Americans to fight their wars for them. This is a lie on a couple of levels. On the first level, the Israeli Air Force doesn't operate without Pentagon support, be it from the spare parts, to the fueling, to the logistics, to the satellite imagery, to the target selection. The Pentagon is fully integrated into this. Some of these guys online have developed two indicators. One is the pizza indicator, and the other one is the gay bar indicator. And on
you got to explain those.
I will. The pizza indicator looks at the pizza shops that are closest to the Pentagon. There's a Domino's, and there's a Papa John's, and there's a couple of others. And when these guys are very busy at night, it means that the Pentagon is doing something in the Middle East.
Okay.
And so these were incredibly busy during the nights that the Israelis are bombing. The gay bar indicator is when the gay bar close to the Pentagon is very empty on a night that it should be full. It means that everybody who would normally be there is now at work.
That's fucking crazy.
So that
war is good for pizza, but it's bad for
gay
bars.
Apparently.
So during wars, we should invest in Papa John's.
Apparently.
And during peace, we invest in gay bars around the Pentagon. Oh my God, we live in a crazy world.
But not only that, even people on the ground will tell you that Americans are fully involved in all Israeli military decision-making.
Yeah.
And the Israelis cannot pull off that kind of operation if the Americans were to firmly say, no, we won't back you, we won't provide you with the intelligence, the spare parts, etc., etc.
Can it be a scenario where Israel explains to the Pentagon, we're going to make strikes? The Pentagon can disagree? Because I think it came out that Marco Rubio was said to have had a blazing row, was it with Netanyahu? But they're not, there's like this reluctant acceptance that's happening, and they have to monitor what's happening because there are US interests.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
I don't see how this serves American interests.
Well, how does it...
I haven't heard anybody properly articulate the case without resorting to stupid talking points like Khamenei is another Hitler. Do you want New York to go up in a nuclear bomb, etc., etc.? These are hollow talking points. Khamenei is a bad dictator. Yes, he does torture and kill. He does order terrorist attacks. He does have goonish hit squads that control his society. Yes, absolutely. That doesn't imply that he is, after the defeat of Assad and the defeat of Hezbollah, a real threat to the Americans. As a matter of fact, after the defeat of Assad and Hezbollah, what happened essentially was a realization that the Islamic Revolution had failed, that the export of the Islamic Republic of Iran's model to places like Lebanon and Iraq was falling apart, and that they couldn't sustain this revolution.
Why does it fail?
It failed because of Israeli military action. It failed because I think in Syria what happened was some kind of Israeli, Turkish, Russian deal to get rid of Assad, who had become too much of a burden. The Iranians just didn't have it in them to continue backing him, particularly after the weakening of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the elimination of Hezbollah's senior command in Lebanon at the hands of Israel. But to sort of say that what can be done to Hezbollah in Lebanon, which controls a small portion of a small country, can be done to a country like Iran with 80, 90 million people is a bit absurd. Because even if you were to eliminate a part of the Iranian leadership, which the Israelis have done successfully, you're dealing with a huge state with borders with, I think, 11 or 13 different countries, occupying a central position in Asia, sitting atop unmeasurable natural resources.
Population of 92 million.
92 million.
I can't believe Ted Cruz didn't know that.
Well, if he couldn't provide a ballpark figure of the population, just on the details of it, don't you need to know, if you were to collapse the government, how many people need to be fed? How many people are going to walk into Europe? How many soldiers will you need to actually accomplish that job? Isn't it a function of the size of the population?
Well, I don't know as a senator how much he needs to know this in relation to how influential he is over the decision-making of the process.
He's influential over foreign policy. People like Ted Cruz are put in positions where they have a say over foreign policy, and what they say on foreign policy does end up mattering. Because of the way that America works, where the president needs an alliance with a number of senators, and leading figures in the Senate have, as a result, important influence.
I think it's overstated the importance that he needs to know the population of the country. But personally, I don't think it affects his decision. I think it's important that people who are making decisions know and have plans for, if there is regime change and how you feed. I think that is important, the people involved in those decisions. I felt like a gotcha.
The fact that he couldn't say 50 million to 100 million matters.
Okay.
Because unless you're in the right ballpark as to what this entails, you shouldn't be advocating it so strongly.
What's he advocating for?
Well,
only regime change.
There's no such thing as only regime change.
No, but
because in these societies,
advocating for non-interventionist regime change.
He's advocating for using, if you were to take the conclusion of what he was saying, this kind of non-interventionist regime change would happen if the Americans and or the Israelis were to back ethnic minorities like the Kurds and the Arabs and the Baloch and possibly the Azeris
for a popular uprising,
to try to use them to form militias to attack Tehran and get rid of the current crew in government. This is civil war.
Of course, yeah.
And this has massive repercussions in the same way that the Syrian civil war gave us, 10 million refugees of which a few million ended up in Europe, advocating for a civil war in a country of 80 million is something that can lead easily to 20 million refugees. And of those, half, a third, are going to end up in Europe. So,
okay, that's a strong defense. I walk back my point. He
yeah.
should have known.
So advocating this kind of thing is without considering the second-order consequences of it, including how are we going to feed them if we destroy their economy? Because that's going to be required to achieve regime change.
Do you think this is the goal? This is the goal of Israel, the US. It is
Yes.
ultimately regime.
Yes. Yes. And it's to keep these countries. The Israelis see it as them defending themselves against a regime that is committed to their destruction. Fair enough. But China is committed to the West's destruction in terms of economic power. North Korea is committed to the destruction of South Korea in terms of its governing model. The Soviet Union was committed to the destruction of the West, etc., etc., etc. Just because somebody hates you and says he hates you doesn't mean that you then go and destabilize an enormous nation that can have knock-on effects on Iraq, Syria, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, and not consider what the implications might be. Having a weak Shia theocracy in Iran sandwiched between Pakistan and Turkey is better than the alternative, which is having Turkey expand on one side and Iran expand on and Pakistan expand on the other, and therefore ending up in a situation where the Sunni world, which is a much bigger threat to the West, is very strongly empowered against the West and against Israel. So when you're going to advocate for something like regime change, first you've got to understand, why is this regime there in the first place? What does it reflect about the nature of the country and its history? And therefore, are you actually going to replace it with something that is better for you and everyone around you? Second, you've got to think about the second-order consequences. It's not that you get rid of Saddam and you get liberal democracy. You get rid of Saddam and you get 1,000 mini-Saddams who are much worse than Saddam. Bad as he was genuinely a tyrant. But
there was a stability that came with it.
And there are consequences to ending that stability. And these consequences have been horrific for the Middle East. And it was Netanyahu. He went to the American Congress. You could probably find that video. He went to the U.S. Congress and essentially promised that the Americans would be welcomed as liberators. And he sold them this lie the first time. And now, rinse and repeat, within our lifetimes, this is happening again.
And so this...
And sorry, getting rid of Saddam didn't teach the West anything about let's be restrained, or particularly didn't teach the Americans anything about let's be restrained when facing Assad or when facing Gaddafi. Let's find a way to have an acceptable settlement where they bother us, but not as much as they could, and the country doesn't fall apart to roving gangs, and in Syria's case and in Libya's case, people who are literally trading in modern slaves. So these things have to be thought out. What's going to happen after you do this? Okay, you decapitate the regime. Congratulations. What are you going to get afterwards?
Well, I found it insane that Trump was flirting with the idea of assassinating the Ayatollah. And you just worry, at a local level, does this mean we're going to have Iranian Islamists on the streets of London committing atrocities here? Are we going to be back in that world, which we seem to have moved away from more recently?
We still have the pro-Palestine protests happening quite regularly. No,
but I mean, thinking of troop bombings, I'm thinking of stabbing attacks, I'm thinking machete attacks.
Yes.
We had a period where London felt like at any point we could have another Islamist attack. And I feel like we've moved away from that. I can't remember the last one.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I don't want it back.
now it's a sort of low-level thing. Remember the guy who tried to burn the Quran and then two random passerbys just sort of, one stabbed him and the other started kicking him?
Yeah, not good.
Not good, but you have that latent potential for escalation, exactly as you say. That potential is there. And so, okay, nobody's saying that this regime is good, but it's keeping a very complex country together, a country that could easily be in civil war. The Americans' intelligence assessment is that they weren't seeking nuclear weapons as of last month, that recently. And now it's a regime change war? That's an escalation.
Yeah, of course. What do you think Netanyahu? What do you think is the outcome Netanyahu is looking for? What is the upside here to Israel, a country bordered by many people who hate them?
Just getting rid of another enemy.
They would rather low-level risk from a
because they're not going to receive any migrants into Israel. They're not going to allow that. They might allow in a few Baha'is and a few Iranian Jews, but they're not going to deal with the flood, essentially. They can be very selective about who they allow in.
They might get some bus bombings and stabbing attacks.
The Baha'is, and they're getting that anyway from the Palestinians.
Yes.
Which is a different story. But that's something that is there because of the conflict with the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. It's not there because of the conflict with Iran. They get rid of a party of a state that's been backing insurgency in the West Bank. Poorly so. The West Bank insurgency is not particularly well organized or capable. The Israelis are worried about that. My concern is that the Israelis are now in a position where they don't feel any military pressure, or for that matter, real political pressure, to back down. So if they've gotten rid of all of the enemies around them, then the only thing stopping them from succeeding in the project to expel the Palestinians from Gaza is that Egyptian border with Gaza. And then they can decide, we're going to bomb that border.
So do you believe...
And we're going to force the Palestinians out of Gaza and into Egypt. And if the Egyptian military tries to do something about it, we'll deal with them.
So you believe Netanyahu's plan is for Israel to expand fully into Gaza, redevelop it, and that to be Israeli land?
Yes.
So it is essentially a genocide.
It's ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
With mass murder, including the mass murder of civilians. The whole genocide thing, I try not to use that term in a population that's growing, because that is a little bit absurd. It is ethnic cleansing, and it is the targeting of civilians, and we're seeing them attack civilians as they try to collect aid from these new aid stations that have been set up.
14 yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah. And more every day, and it's sort of become normalized, and with the attention being on Iran, this is sort of okay now all of a sudden.
Yeah, just out of interest, whilst they've been bombing Iran, has there been any kind of observations of what they've been doing in Gaza? Is any part of this, look over here so you don't look here?
They're doing the same thing. People are getting shot as they're trying to collect aid.
Can you look that up? Because I saw that kind of on Twitter, but I haven't read the article.
No, the war is continuing in Gaza.
No, but the targeting, there's targeting with missiles and using the excuse of collateral damage. They're shooting people collecting aid, which is in an entirely different proposition. Yes. That is straight up murder.
Yes, it is. And the objective is to show the Palestinians that nobody can protect them. And therefore, if the Israelis do decide that they're going to force the Egyptians to open the border in Rafah, in the very south of Gaza, to allow the Palestinians out, then the Palestinians should leave.
Because
that's the actual objective of Israel.
They're moving them east to west, right?
And they're sort of pushing them southwards to sort of concentrate them, and then they can push them out of there. I mean, you have to remember, distances in Gaza are absolutely tiny. This isn't a big part of the world. This is an absolutely tiny part of the world. And if they succeed in Gaza, they're going to do the same thing in the West Bank. And they're going to do the same thing in Jordan. What they're doing in Gaza, in the West Bank, is slowly destroying the Palestinian camps. These are camps where these are towns built very shoddily, where Palestinians who were expelled in 48 and 67 are now living. And the Israelis are slowly dismantling them, slowly making them uninhabitable. They've already built a full new road network throughout the West Bank that bypasses all of the Palestinians so that the Israelis have total freedom of movement. And they've turned the West Bank into small pockets where they can keep the Palestinians very strongly contained and where they can check the movement of any Palestinian individual or group.
It's very strategic.
It's very well thought out. It's very planned. And the objective is obvious. It is to get rid of these people because we can't live with them. And then you hear officials in the Israeli government saying, well, we should send them to Spain, or we should send them to Ireland, or we should send them to France or to Germany or wherever. So they're saying, these people are so awful, we cannot live with them. Here, you take them. Which is quite something to say, considering that the Germans are involved in refueling Israeli aircraft as they're bombing Iran, considering that the French and the British are both involved in intercepting Iranian drones and missiles to keep them from hitting Israel. This is their reaction. I understand the Israelis' perspective. They today only see the world from the perspective of the Holocaust. And they think that any threat to them is going to be equal to Hitler, and they're going to be wiped out, and they're going to be massacred and genocided. I understand that. But I also come from a small minority community before converting. And there are times, and there are still times, where this minority community, the Druze, has disproportionately large political power. The lesson to us has been, be restrained in that use of power, because you're a tiny minority in a hostile sea. You want to be extremely cautious on how you do things. And you want to be quite strategic, and you want to keep the people around you deterred, but not enraged. Because you can't handle everybody around you hating you at the same time. You're just too small. That seems wise, I think, even if it's me saying it about my own original community, but that seems wise. You don't want to be in a fully hostile relationship with everybody around you. The Israelis can't see that. Not only that, if they'd allowed Iran to sort of transition through the defeat of the Islamic Revolution, which was going to happen with Khamenei, the supreme leader, being 85 years old, they could have ended up with a nationalist Iranian government that sort of saw Israel as a potential partner and working to contain Turkey together and things of that nature. That would have been a conceivable possibility, because a lot of Iran's old clients or potential clients were looking for that kind of arrangement and would have been open to it. Now you've just closed the door on that and are on the way towards creating an absolute state of chaos.
What's the source in this one, Con?
National.
This is the National. So this is an Emirati newspaper, which tends to be, if this is the, oh no, this is the Scottish National, sorry.
Okay.
So I don't know that one.
Okay. Israeli strikes kill 72 Palestinians, 29 wage for aid trucks. More than 70 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces across Gaza, including people who were waiting for aid trucks. Health officials have said around 100 Palestinians seeking aid were injured in an attack, with left 29 dead. Another Israel. So these are strikes. These aren't being shot. 8 more people killed, another injured, including a woman and 2 children. Israel. So all strikes.
Yeah. But they're all strikes, and the bodies of 20 people shot dead while waiting for aid trucks were left on the street for 5 days.
The bodies of 20 people shot dead in northern Gaza by Israeli forces while waiting for aid trucks were left on the street for 5 days before civil defense paramedics on the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian.
So this is mass murder.
Yeah. Hold on a second. I told you about the death they were saying. His nephew wasn't a resistance fighter. He simply went to get a bag of flour. Connor, can you just Google that? Go and copy that. The 20 people shot dead in northern Gaza. Can you just Google that and go to news? Yeah, go into news. Right. Israel was organized. Dozens reported dead after Gaza. Right. Yeah. Go. Just go up to scroll. Go to the top. Do the Al Jazeera. Do you trust the Al Jazeera?
They make up narratives, but they don't fully make up facts out of whole cloth. They sometimes make mistakes. So I don't fully trust them. Is the short answer.
I want to know the justification for shooting 20 people collecting flour.
There isn't one.
No, of course.
The thinking for the Israelis is that we need to make this uninhabitable.
Well, look,
this is the actual objective.
So I saw
this is old Middle Eastern rules. At the end of the day,
victims including a woman and 2 children.
Yeah, how do you can't accidentally shoot?
No.
And I saw with the strikes in Iran when they were striking the nuclear scientists, they had pinpoint precision missiles that would go into a building and into the bedroom where the nuclear scientist was sleeping. They were precision. That was precision. It didn't take out the building.
Yes,
they got the person they wanted.
So these guys, they got them a lot of cases with drones. They managed to very impressively have drones operating from within Iran and conduct attacks inside Iran. They had pre-positioned the drones.
It's insane, isn't it?
The level of Israeli intelligence capability is incredible.
Mossad is impressive.
Very. Which also means that these civilian casualties are not accidental, because we know that you have this capability to be extremely precise.
But that means there are people who sat down, the war cabinet or whatever, strategically planning to ethnically cleanse through a pattern of flattening buildings, scaring people, intimidating, and it is a ethnic cleansing strategy.
So to be charitable and to try to explain the Israeli perspective as best as I can, their conclusion is there is no way we can live with these people in peace.
I think they would feel the same.
And the Palestinians feel exactly the same way. There is no way for peaceful coexistence.
But they have bigger guns.
And therefore, we must use the fact that we have bigger guns today in order to drive them out, and therefore have a sort of fortress Israel that can live at peace and not have the Palestinians who are indigenous at the end of the day, and they're like the whole idea that they're from somewhere else, that's a complete fabrication. So that we could have peace by getting rid of these people, because there are 20 Arab countries and there are 70-something Muslim countries. They could go and live there. And so in order to achieve that objective, a certain level of cruelty is required, and we are therefore exercising that cruelty for a greater good of the Jewish people living in peace. That's the thinking behind it from the Israeli side. Now, there is some truth to the idea that they cannot live together in peace.
Agreed.
It's just not possible.
It's been a perpetual state of war my entire life.
Pretty much. Exactly.
I feel like it's been weekly/monthly news.
Yes.
For as long as I can remember.
Yes. Every few years we have another big round, and so on and so forth. That's been the case all of my life as well,
Can I just say one thing on this though? When we see protests, pro-Palestinian protests in London, universities in America, there are a lot of people who are quite condemning against these protests. They refer to them as Hamas sympathizers, or they will pick out the worst people within these protests who say the most outrageous things, which are not acceptable. But I also believe there are plenty of people within these protests who are pro-Palestinian, who believe there should be a two-state solution, and who have a massive amount of empathy for people who are being ethnically cleansed. I would say I'm within that camp. But there seems to be a campaign to delegitimize any form of protest which is pro the people of Palestine, not Hamas, just pro the Palestinian people.
important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
Look, the best argument against these protesters is that they, at heart, organizationally, represent the same red-black alliance that toppled the Shah, an alliance between radical leftists and Islamists, who are the organizers and the brains and the speakers, with a mass of people attached to them. When you think of a political movement, I find that it is very important to understand the organizers and to understand the ideologues, and that the bulk of people will come to any half-popular, moderately argued cause. So I take your point that the average protester there is not some rabid Hamas sympathizer. But I also think that at the organizational level, you are seeing precisely that. So the attack on these protesters is, I find, justified, because the leftists who are involved are on the farthest of the far left and can't think of a single good thing to say about the West in general. And the Islamists who are involved are, at the end of the day, here to take over. And their objective is to Islamize the world because they believe that this is the right thing to do. So the protests in favor of the Palestinians, there is definitely a bulk of people who are there because they believe that this is wrong, and it is wrong. We shouldn't be confused about that. Yeah. However,
they're being used.
They are being used by horrific people who genuinely hate and want to destroy the West and are close to succeeding.
Are you talking about the leftists or the Islamists? Because they both hate the West.
So if you look at the history of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and if you look at the history of the whole politics of Iran in the 20th century, especially in the second half of the 20th century, until the revolution overthrew the Shah, you would find that there's always been this arrangement between the left and the Islamists, and you would always find that the left were the dupes.
Of course.
Because when push came to shove, the Islamists had zero concern about lining them up against the wall and getting rid of them.
Throwing them off buildings if they were gay.
Doing all kinds of horrific things to them. Although I'm not sure I think Iran hangs rather than throws off buildings. Just for the sake of the fact checkers out there.
Just help me understand also, just because my comparator would be Lebanon, which I've been to, which is to me, fairly kind of cool place, quite secular, quite modern. I felt fairly safe within.
You didn't go to Dahi.
You didn't go
to the Bekaa.
Yeah, no, but I went to Zahi.
You did go to Dahi, okay.
Oh, sorry, you pronounced it different. Yeah, I went to Zahi. And look, I know that's like a Hezbollah.
Yes.
Strong region. It's economically deprived. No, we did go there.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. We saw a lot of the economic deprivation, but we didn't go to the Hezbollah region.
Right.
Like the deep Hezbollah region.
Yes.
We went to the city centre. So my friend lives there.
Right.
But we did also go to Beirut.
Yeah.
Under the Shah, was Iran was more similar to what Beirut is now?
In some ways, there was always this divide between the rural areas who were very religious and the cities who were leftist and secular. And in the same way that industrialization and economic modernity hit the West and contributed to the rise of leftism as a reaction to the excesses of capital, the same dynamic played out in Iran. And so you had the Communist Party called the Tuda Party that became extremely strong in Iran, and that when it was, it never came close to governing, and therefore, while it was still trying to reach for power, it would regularly make common cause with nationalists or liberals or even the clerical establishment in some cases. So you had this dynamic there, At the same time, you had a big bulk of highly conservative people, and you had Tehran being extremely modern, socially more liberal, etc., etc. So you've always had these different currents pulling in the country, in the same way that you had that in Egypt or that you had that in Syria or wherever. Now, over time, in a country like Egypt, society became much more religious, in the same way that's happened in Turkey and is now beginning to fizzle out, in the same way that's happening in Syria or happened in Syria. So you always get this ebb and flow of religious sentiment and rise of leftist movements. The challenge was to keep order in a way that would be seen acceptable by the bulk of people, and for the forces of order to be able to make alliances in order to stay in power and to govern well. For the Shah, the modernization happened too quickly. And as a result of that modernization, and it was quite impressive, and in the way that it happened, it did lead to a backlash. And he lost control of his security services, who were extremely violent and vicious, and then he just lost the narrative.
No. Why do leftists fuck everything up?
Look, it's sort of human nature within us. It's within our nature to try to bring people down and destroy things. And we need to have enough religious conviction to resist that urge. Like, if I see someone better than me, I am jealous, but I try to tame the things within me and say, no, learn, be humble, be good, be charitable. In mass, it becomes very hard, especially when the capitalist side of society also ignores the welfare of the downtrodden. And that's what also empowers the left. So it's partly human nature, it's partly leaders abandoning their responsibility. And one of their key responsibilities is justice of some form and care for the poor and the weak. So these are the sort of dynamics I find that bring us to this.
The cycle will play out forever.
We are in a fallen world.
That if we had a strong religious foundation, Christian foundation, might save us.
That is the hope. That is the eternal challenge. That's what we're fighting against every day. We're fighting against the forces of evil within us. And if those in power don't recognize that that's happening and don't take care, these forces of evil within us will overwhelm them.
Is that not the exact same thing Islamists are fighting for?
No. The Islamists do make common cause with that, and Islam has a strong tradition of charity and of care for the poor. Yes, so there is that.
But they would argue if there was one strong religion, Islam,
yes,
the world would be a better place.
I'm not convinced by that, because we are talking about Iran, and we are talking about Saudi, and we are talking about Turkey. And we're not seeing that better place, firstly. Secondly...
Well, what does better place mean?
What does it mean in a fallen world as well? Secondly, my objection to it is grounded in theology and truth. I just don't think that it's true, and therefore it cannot deliver because it isn't true. It doesn't mean that there aren't periods of justice under Islamic rule. There are. But it doesn't mean that Islam solves any problems.
I, as a non-believer myself, I find it very hard, and this is a tough question on you, but to not pinpoint a lot of the problems within the Middle East as religion itself. Christianity and Islam? I don't think it's the mashup, right? The mashup of many different belief systems in one place.
Let's think about it this way. Let me concede where you're right first, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. Where you're right is here. In Israel, there is a faction that believes that the coming of the Messiah is contingent on finding the right red heifer or building the temple a third time or other things that are extremely provocative to Muslims. And that's true. There are people within Israel who believe that, as well as people who believe that trying for peace with Muslims is simply wrong because that is conceding land that God gave to the Jewish people and only to the Jewish people, not to the heretics. And if these guys wanted to live, they need to accept Jewish supremacy in this region, and that is the only way that they would be allowed to remain in the land that Israel is trying to claim. So there is that religious dimension, which is new to some extent to the State of Israel, because the founding of the State of Israel was a secular nationalist project, and that's why a lot of rabbis opposed it back in the 19th century. So the rabbis of Europe didn't like the idea of Zionism because they thought that this was a secular nationalist project, and they thought that God's sentence on the Jews is for them to be in exile, and that trying to establish a homeland would happen only when the Messiah came, and therefore this Zionist project is fundamentally not valid. This is transformed, and now you have people in positions of extreme power in Israel who are very serious religious fanatics, who think that there can be no compromise with anybody, and that anybody who isn't either Jewish or willing to submit to the Jews should be out. On the Islamic side, I remember when the former president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, was sitting with 3 European foreign ministers, France, Britain, and Germany, and they told him that Iran was instigating chaos in the region, and his answer was, do you know why chaos is good? Chaos is good because it helps bring about the Mahdi. The Mahdi in Islamic theology is the figure who will come with Christ to bring about 1,000 years of justice and the end times. And there's a Sunni Mahdi and a Shia Mahdi, but I won't bore you with that. And this level of, this messianic way of thinking that both sides are involved in is extremely destructive and leads people to these kinds of outcomes. So in that, you are right. The Christian response to this is, if somebody is that thirsty for power, there are times where I'm going to let him have it, if I can't actually defend myself. And the Christian thinking around just war involves the idea that if this war is fundamentally unwinnable, or if the consequences of this war are more destructive than not fighting it, then it cannot be called a just war, and you shouldn't fight it. So today, if the Christians of Lebanon were to say, we're going to try to fight the Muslims today and destroy them, that wouldn't be a just war because it's an unwinnable war, and it's suicidal. And so if a foreign invader comes and he wants to rule, you try to restrain him with the laws and with Christian teaching if you cannot militarily resist him. If either the Jews or the Muslims were to adopt that mindset, a lot of what's happening wouldn't happen. And if they were both to take that theological position for the Israelis, that look, this is a country that is trying to dominate the Middle East, it's like having Crimea dominate Russia. It's insane. Or Sicily dominate Europe. It's insane. It can't happen with a population this small on a territory this small. A lot of problems would be solved. If the Muslims were to say, we're going to be charitable to the Jews, fine, they drove us out, we're going to choose forgiveness rather than vengeance, this would be solved. To be able to make that choice is extremely difficult because it is a spiritual choice. And the only way to make it is to be a Christian.
Yes.
So I don't agree that the problem is religion. The problem is false religion.
Sure, but you have a bias.
Obviously.
I would argue from the other side that this is a modern day version of the Crusades in a way.
The Crusades were justified. The majority of the people in the Holy Land were Christians. For 400 years, the Muslims were attacking Christendom and individual Christians, and it took Christianity 400 years to organize a fight back. I'd say that's an ultimate example of tolerance. That's extreme patience. So from the Crusades, no, because it was winnable. The reason the Crusades didn't succeed was because they didn't take Damascus. So it was contingent on capturing one more city. And then the whole history of the region would have been fundamentally different, because capturing that city would have meant that there was a stable anchor within the Syrian coast, extending from Turkey to Sinai, through the string of 4 cities, Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and Damascus. It was just Damascus that didn't fall. If Damascus had fallen, the Crusades would have worked, and we would be dealing with a still Christian Middle East, which would have solved this whole problem to begin with.
You hope so. You never
We
know.
will always be in a fallen world.
Yeah, but so...
We will always be in a fallen world.
But who genuinely, which country, which political leader is genuinely making their decisions from a theological basis?
Iran is.
Well-
Iran is. Iran's objection to Israel is not strategic. When the Shah ruled, he ruled in alliance with Israel and alliance with the West, in order to stop the Soviet Union, but also to check the Arabs, whose nationalism at the time was quite rabid, and which was a threat to the southern part of Iran, where a lot of the oil is concentrated. So, no, Iran is ruled under theological ideas. The people who are in Netanyahu's government, people like Smotrich and people like Ben-Gvir, and the parties that support them, Ben-Gvir had a photograph in his office of a guy who had shot, I think it was 29 or 40 Palestinians in 1994 as they were praying in a mosque. Baruch Goldstein is his name. And Ben-Gvir had a photo of this guy in his home or in his office, and he saw him as a hero. And he believed that the way to deal with the Palestinians is to shoot more of them. Because of his beliefs, he is currently arming more and more Israelis in order to prepare for a civil war against the Palestinians. So no. These guys have religion deeply informing their thinking. A lot of secular people struggle to accept the extent to which faith and beliefs inform actions. But they certainly do. Iran and Israel are natural allies, geographically speaking, geopolitically speaking, taking the ideology out of it.
Mm-hmm.
On a purely nationalist level, their interests coincide. An expanded Israel means that there's a big bunch of desert between it and Iran. That's good. That's safe. That's no longer a strategic threat. So they have ways of working together. Turkey and Israel, same thing. They can easily be allies and divide bits and pieces of the Levant between them. Turkey is, the official position is open and naked hostility to Israel. Under the table, they do all kinds of deals and all kinds of agreements, and they trade quite well. But the Turkish public demands that a strong and stern position be taken against Israel because of its religious beliefs and because it's outrageous what the Israelis are doing. That should also be said. So it's not just pure fanaticism. And Erdogan navigates it. He feeds the public the rhetoric that they demand. And he also makes things happen that are seen as being in the economic or military interests of Turkey. So I don't think that you can say that that these things don't inform how people behave. Our beliefs define what we see as right and wrong, and what we see as in our interest and not as in our interest. So it's through our beliefs that we decide what are our actual objectives. Then we think in pragmatic and practical terms about what we're going to try to achieve. And from the Israeli side, they've concluded that we can't live with these people, and the Palestinians have concluded the same thing.
Fight to the death.
And therefore, fight to the death. is the only logical conclusion from these beliefs.
Is the Iranian regime corrupt?
Oh, yes.
What's the theological basis for that?
Look, they shouldn't be in a purely theological terms, but human nature does also. I mean, I say that as a Christian. I'm not a particularly good Christian, and I'm definitely not a good Christian all the time. So yes, there is human nature there. But if you wanted to think of a pragmatic justification of it, it's a low-trust society. And therefore, nepotism is a way of ensuring the people who are loyal to you are in positions of power.
Is there an easy way to define a strong difference between what is a theological basis for your actions and an ideological basis for your actions?
I don't think about it this way. The way I've always thought about it is that ideology is sort of failed religion, in that we as human beings think with an ideological background ingrained in our minds. If you articulate it properly and you have a proper dogma, you're aware of it and you're aware of why you're being dogmatic. If you're not, you're sort of on autopilot.
The framing for this is that I understand the theological basis and argument for the actions of Iran. I can understand that. But I also believe there could be an ideological hatred of Israel based on a position of empathy for their fellow man in Palestine, feeling like the atrocities have been committed against them. So there's almost like an ideological hatred that drives actions as well. And I'm wondering, are they basically the same thing, or is there a grounded difference in theology?
I don't know. That's a bit too nuanced for me.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to see the shootings of civilians, the extent of bombing of civilian areas, the systematic destruction of every habitable structure in Gaza, and not conclude that this is evil and should be stopped. It's very difficult to do that. It's also hard not to see Israel's logic for doing this, so to speak.
Yeah, an uncomfortable truth.
It's an uncomfortable truth. We can't live with them unless we stop being Jewish. That's the crux of it. And so I get where they're coming from. But as to theoretically separating which part is theological, which part is ideological, that's a little bit more difficult.
There are protests in Israel that I'm aware of. I don't see it reported in the mainstream news, but I do see it reported on Twitter. And I see the same in Iran. There are, in both countries, I don't know if it's... I mean,
there are people who hate Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel.
Because he's corrupt and they don't want to support...
That corrupt? Really?
Really?
No, if you look at the details of the cases, one of them was helping a businessman so that he'd get more favorable coverage. Look at what politicians do for the media. It's sort of,
low-level corruption.
Low-level corruption. One of it was him getting cigars. Come on. A box of cigars or a couple of boxes of cigars. Okay. And some just sort of random gifts, very comparable to Keir Starmer and Lord Ali, which is corrupt. But it's not the kind of corruption that is, my standards on corruption as someone from Lebanon are quite high.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, I've been to Lebanon. It's, Lebanon has our high poverty rate and billionaire thieves.
Yeah, our level of corruption is considerably higher.
Yeah,
considerably higher.
You could set it a bit lower.
So I'm not sort of quickly accusing Netanyahu of extreme corruption, not by Lebanese standards.
Let's just bring this. So Israelis are currently protesting in Tel Aviv, and some of them have chained themselves, demanding Netanyahu's government complete all stages of the ceasefire and exchange deal.
So this was a little bit.
This was March 1st.
No, there was more recent.
There are regularly some protests.
Look at that. Go up, Gatash, Connor. Click on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Iran just bombed the hospital. So do you know what's really weird? Is I've seen a number of photos in Tel Aviv where it looks like Gaza.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to tweet it out, but I don't know if people would have understood what I meant. In that, I don't know if they expected such a response from Iran. I didn't know if they expected them to be able to penetrate the Iron Dome. But I think there is a reality that there are people in Tel Aviv who are starting to witness and experience what people of Gaza have been under, which is indiscriminate strikes, because I don't believe Iran has the technology to be the precision which Israel has. But they're seeing what's happening in Gaza on their doorstep.
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is, it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com.
They have a high level of precision in some of their strikes.
Cool.
So the attack on the Soroka hospital in Beersheba, there was a military base nearby that was being targeted. And it seems that some of the damage ended up in that hospital. Possibly as a result of interceptions, possibly as a result of imprecision. We haven't seen the Iranians put hospitals on their target list. So today they also hit the stock exchange. A couple of days ago, they hit the Haifa refinery. These are strategic targets. They're hitting air bases.
They hit the internal Iranian financial system as well, though, didn't they?
So the Israelis did cyber attacks on Iran against the financial system, and they attacked the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting Company.
It's strange seeing these videos in Tel Aviv because you're seeing a very modern city being attacked. Do we know how many people have been killed in Tel Aviv?
I believe it's this morning there were 50 injured, 3 in critical condition. I think it's in the tens.
Yeah, I think I read 24.
It's the low tens.
But the exact numbers. This could turn on Netanyahu quickly.
It depends on how long the Iranians can sustain their missile fire. So the challenge for Iran is multifaceted. Firstly, they don't have a lot of great options in terms of fighting this war. If they were to try to race towards a nuclear bomb, this leads to the Americans going all in, which becomes a problem. And if they got a nuclear bomb, then what? Israel has second strike capability, and if you were to nuke Israel, the Americans would nuke you 10 times over. If they were to try to cut the oil, that would lead to the Americans joining the war, but it would also lead to the Americans blockading Iranian ports. And all they'd have is access to the Caspian. All Iran would have left is just access to the Caspian Sea, which is not enough to meet the amount of stuff and goods and food that they need. So their best bet right now is to keep on firing these missiles and to increase the frequency of fire, but also to make sure that they hit. So in the first salvos, it seems that the Israeli air defense did okay, but not a perfect job. And nobody has perfect air defense.
Yeah.
Yesterday, with the hits that we saw, it seems that the Iranians still have the capacity to deliver accurate hits. They fired 25 missiles, 5 of them hit their targets. So this is still a high rate of interception, but this is still quite bad for the Israelis. The problem for Iran is that their economy can get wrecked by the Israelis faster than they can wreck the Israeli economy. The advantage that they have is that it's a much bigger country, and on a purchasing power parity basis, so, adjusting for the value of goods and services that you buy in the country, the Iranian economy is 4 times that of Israel almost. So if they can keep access to their ports open, And if they get Chinese and Russian support, they can stay in this war for a very long time.
Do we know how much support they are getting from China and Russia? Because I read that Putin, he's trying to intervene to end this.
He'd rather this ends with the Iranian regime functional and the Iranian state functional.
Because it's support for him and they provided weapons to him?
Because it empowers Turkey too much.
Okay.
Because it empowers Turkey too much. And it makes Turkey a much bigger threat in the Caucasus if he doesn't have Iran on side.
But I thought Turkey had a good relationship with Russia as well.
They have a very good relationship with knives behind their backs. They're very polite to each other. They're very professional with each other. But Putin knows that Erdogan is ready to stab him, and Erdogan knows that Putin is ready to stab him. These are relationships that rely on a balance of power. So long as there is a balance of power and there is a three-legged stool in the Caucasus, you can manage stability in the Caucasus, in the Middle East, in Central Asia.
Right. Connor, have you seen these missile attacks at night?
Did you see the one
From
from
the-
the party in Lebanon?
Yes.
No.
Oh my God, this is dystopian.
It was on my X.
I saw the one from the Indian ship. I need sound. Hold on, pause it. Because I thought... Okay, go on. What the fuck? This is insane. That is insane. By the way, did you see that one of Elon Musk's starships blew up today? So I saw that and I thought it was a war explosion. I just came up and I clicked it. Sorry, I'm completely divergent.
Yes.
Sorry to listeners, but you just need to see this. This starship exploded on a test. Did you see it?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Wait till you see this. So it was a test firing.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know if there's any dead or whatever.
Whoa! Yeah, probably. I mean, even the other day when they... Whoa! Whoa!
You know on Twitter how they autoplay? I
Yes.
scrolled down and saw that,
What?
and I was like,
That's
what
not
is
a
that?
war.
And I
Yes.
assumed it was part of the war.
Yes.
That's insane. Okay. So, I mean, that was dystopian and weird. So, how do you think this plays out?
Look, there are several ways. It's really difficult to destroy the Iranian nuclear sites, especially the Fordo facility. This is built with the objective of surviving this kind of attack. And it seems that the Iranians have an additional facility that's equally well fortified.
Is this why they're talking about these 30,000 pound,
Yes.
200-foot deep bombs that come from?
Yes.
Yeah.
But 200 feet is around 60 meters. And I think this is closer to 90 to XX plus.
Couple on top of each other,
It's
make the
not-
hole bigger.
Maybe, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
And the mountains of Iran are really hard rock. And the IRGC has been developing special cement that absorbs the shocks from this kind of bombing, meaning that the penetrative power of these bombs gets very reduced when they're targeting these kinds of facilities. And you don't know, so basically there's the entrance, which is above ground, then there's the tunnel that takes you down,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have no idea on what kind of depth the facility actually sits and what
And where it
extensions
is,
have been
yeah.
made.
Yeah. Did you see the Americans have cleared a Qatari base?
Yes, I saw one report about that they've withdrawn their aircraft, which would have been extremely vulnerable to Iranian missiles.
I mean,
And that's another indicator that the Americans are going to join this war.
yeah. Well, and also following what Ukraine did, where they destroyed a Russian fleet of
Yes.
aircraft with a bunch of drones, and then there was another thing where they showed a whole bunch of American soldiers eating lobster and steak, and they're like, "Why are they feeding them such a great meal?"
I don't know if they've decided to join the war. This is still being hotly debated.
Do you think they're flirting it just to scare Iran?
You have to remember that when the Israelis began setting up this attack in Iran, the preliminary attack that took out the air defense and a bunch of commanders, this was well in the past. Negotiations were ongoing. Actually, this happened a year and a half ago, the start of the setup. Meaning that before Trump was elected, the Israelis had decided that they were going to do this. and try to drag the United States into the war.
Mm.
Because our assessment always was that if the Israelis started the war, their objective would be to drag the Americans into it. And that would be what they would try to do through the media, through friendly politicians, through the whole Israel, whatever it does is right crowd, which is a significant contingent of Western politicians and media. So this is a long-planned war. That's one thing to consider. Second, given the amount of Pentagon support for this, and that Trump was saying publicly that I didn't want it, we're left with two possibilities. Either Trump was overruled by Israel and the defense establishment, and they decided to back Israel into this war anyway.
Can that be done?
Yes.
He's the commander-in-chief.
Yes, it can be done. We started by discussing how Bush wanted a restraint policy, Obama didn't want stupid wars, and where we ended up.
Everyone gets involved in stupid wars.
So everybody gets involved whether they like it or not, regardless of what they campaigned on, leading to the question, why are you people voting in the first place? And so the other possibility is that if Trump wasn't overruled, it means that he was just acting on behalf of Israel, and he was just playing make pretend.
Hmm.
And if you're Putin or Xi and you see, oh, this guy just is acting as opposed to someone we should take seriously, how do you make a deal with him on trade or on Ukraine or on anything else? So the implications of this war are quite serious in terms of what it means about the authority of the American president. Is he in charge or isn't he? Are Americans voting to get a policy? Or is this just some sort of ritual that happens to legitimize the system, and the system does whatever it wants? Because these are really the two options here, if he joins this war. So if you see the Pentagon withdrawing jets from Qatar, which is a pretty important location, I want to see what's happening in the bases in Kuwait. In Jordan, they can't be withdrawn because these are participating in the defense of Israel. But if they're clearing out, that means that they're getting ready to join the war, which is pretty, again, I haven't seen anybody make a clear case why the Americans should get involved. And more importantly, your question, how does this play out?
Yeah.
Where do we end up?
Is it another Iraq, another 20-year war?
Because if they can't destroy Fordo from the air, they're going to have to send forces on the ground. Now, these can be airdropped, but dropping them in and extracting them are two different propositions.
Yep.
And how do you know what's waiting for you inside when you go in? You're going literally into tunnels underground where the other side has been getting ready for decades for this exact possibility. So it's not exactly a easy thing to achieve.
Doesn't feel good.
No. And if the Iranians keep firing missiles at Israel, what's going to bring them back to the table and get them to dismantle the nuclear program?
Well,
and if you destroy their
threat
economy,
to themselves?
Maybe. But then, from a theological perspective, if they were to decide that they were willing to die rather than concede, which is what the key figure in Shia Islam did. So the story of Shia Islam is that this gentleman called Hussein bin Ali, the grandson of the Prophet of Islam, went to try to fix how Muslims were being ruled because he believed that they were being ruled unjustly. He ended up facing the prospect of a major battle. It was just him and 40 people against an army of thousands, and he decided, I'm going to fight anyway, rather than be dishonored or concede the point. And he fought and died honorably. And if you're Shia, you're invited to do the same thing. It doesn't mean this is what you will always do.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that there are never any other considerations.
Well,
they could just as easily find a theological way out. So
maintaining regime survival, because they are maybe corrupt.
But if they
and
start
it's a good
destroying the regime and the economy, which is what the Israelis have begun doing with an attack on Iranian energy, with the objective of getting Iran to attack regional energy and draw the US in, then that's it. They're not going to survive. Then they might as well go all in. So this war is a horrifically bad idea.
Like most wars.
There is a just war theory. Sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah.
This one is neither just nor necessary. That's the key point.
Do you think there's any scenario this gets dialed back?
You could see it's up to Trump if he can discipline his own side, essentially, and say to the Iranians, look, how about you get to enrich to 3.5%, and that's all you do for 20 years, and I'll lift those sanctions, and
we have the inspectors in there.
We'll have the inspectors, and so on and so forth. It's a possible way out. From the Iranians' perspective, now that you're attacking them, they're going to insist that the missile program is not on the agenda, and they're going to insist on some kind of enrichment capability. So we go back to the JCPOA, which brings up the question, why did he leave it in the first place, as opposed to make a deal to extend it by another 20 years? And what was the purpose of this nice little show and tell that ended up killing all of these civilians, that ended up causing all of this damage? So it is in the hands of the Americans, but then the question has to be addressed. Who speaks for the United States? The officials in the Pentagon, the permanent bureaucrats in the Pentagon, or the president? This is a real constitutional issue here.
I'm a simple man, Firas. Quite naive.
I wanted to be, man, but then they started bombing me when I was, I don't know how old.
Yeah, you've been through it. I've thankfully never lived with.
Thankfully, I've missed most of the wars in Lebanon.
Yeah, I've lived with it.
Thankfully, I've missed most of them.
We've only lived with terrorist bombs, and very limited in this country.
Yeah.
And I am so tired and sick of wars. As long as I can remember, perpetual state of war with Iran and Palestine. The Bosnian War, I remember that. I went to Yugoslavia before the Bosnian War, 2 Iraq wars. We have almost perpetual state of war between Ukraine and Russia at the moment. There is the threats of China on Taiwan. I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of it. Just sick of war. I'm sick of death. I'm sick of destruction. So sick of it. I'm so over it. How the fuck do we... It feels like we're getting worse. Like, I can map out a scenario in my head quite simply where a world war starts. It might be very short.
Yes.
But we seem to have regional conflicts. Kind of, it's a bit like the ice hockey. Sometimes you just have 2 guys slamming each other, and then sometimes there's another one, and then sometimes everyone's fighting. I feel like we're heading towards like a clearing of the benches and everyone's going to fight.
We are right now in a proxy world war where only the Russians are directly involved of the 3 big players. Now the Americans are being dragged into direct involvement against Iran. And the big geopolitical threat has always been Russia, China, Iran as a combination that dominates Asia and becomes an enormous challenger to the West. If the Chinese wanted to fully back the Iranian regime, they can do a considerable amount of damage. One of the terminuses of the Belt and Road is in Kazakhstan, and that's right next to Iran, and they can get things through the Caspian and get everything that the Iranians need in partnership with the Russians. And the north of Iran and especially the northeast of Iran, this is very difficult territory. Yes, the Israelis right now have dominance over Iranian skies. But if the Chinese start supplying significant amounts of air defense, this can change. And then you've ended up in a situation where the US and Russia are both at war. And for China, that would be the perfect opportunity to make a move on Taiwan. A lot of people believe that this is impossible because Chinese ports can be blockaded and things like that. Fair enough. It's a possibility. But if Chinese ports are blockaded, the whole world economy explodes. Which is
not good.
I mean, the West has put itself in a position where Chinese industrial output is equal to or greater than the next 10 industrial powers combined.
Mm.
In the same way that American military spending is greater than the 10 next spenders combined.
I mean, you mentioned earlier that Israel has made the decision it can never achieve peace and live side by side with the Palestinians, but Iran fundamentally rejects the legitimacy of the Israeli state. So
yes.
Is it not fundamentally the same situation with just a much...
It's a very similar outlook, but the Israelis play a verbal game here. They imply that the problem with questioning the legitimacy of Israel, which as a Catholic I do, means that you are questioning whether or not Jewish people should exist. And then go to the conclusion that Khamenei, by saying that the state of Israel should be destroyed, is saying that all Jews should be destroyed. Now, there is some background to this, which is that in mainstream Islam, the end times will happen when the Muslims fight the Jews, and the Jews try to hide behind a rock or a tree, and the rocks and the trees will say, "Come, slave of Allah, there's a Jew behind me, kill him." So there is some logic to that, but there's also the historic precedent, which is that Baghdad was the center of Jewish life for centuries under Islamic rule. So these things should be taken together in some context. Objecting to the state of Israel, which the Iranians definitely do, isn't the same as saying, I want to destroy the Jews. And when you're dealing with eschatological questions, there's people like Ahmadinejad and a bunch of the Iranian leadership who think that they will help eschatology occur today, which is, they will help the end times occur today, which is the view of some evangelical Protestants like nice Mr. Ted Cruz, that, you know, when the Jews are all in one place, they that'll bring about the rapture, and that'll bring about the end times and things of that nature. So that there is that Protestant view that exists in the United States about Jews. But there's a difference between these. The distinction that I'm trying to draw is between the people who believe that end times will play out in a certain way and people who believe that we are here to help the end times happen. And the people who want end times to happen are there on the Israeli side and are there on the Muslim side. And it shouldn't be forgotten that they are there. And that does drive a level of unhinged, insane behavior that we as Christians should not accept. We have no confidence that we will certainly go to heaven. And if you do and you want the end times to come immediately, you are quite confident of that. And I find that suspect.
Yeah. Could you see a scenario where the Islamic Republic is toppled and there is a new, more modern democracy in Iran, similar to similar to, I don't know what a good example is, but could you see a post-Islamic Republic Iran?
So there's a big chunk of the Iranian public that's sick and tired of the Islamic Republic.
Yeah. All the women.
And suddenly, no, not all the women.
A large percentage.
I think the images that you see of women are representative of a very small liberal minority that is quite noisy. I'm not convinced that this is the majority of women.
Maybe not.
And I think the whole point is really a bit of an irrelevance. when you want to think about...
Well, is it though, really? Because when you think about it, who was it we had on that a lot... You can map the end of certain regimes to... It was Freddie New, to women. Like the fall of the Berlin Wall was...
Right.
The wives were fed up.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that. I'll check it out.
Yeah.
But the point is that in this kind of highly diverse society, you're not going to be able to rule it democratically. It just doesn't work.
Because every time they try, it fails.
Because different communities will pull in different directions, and this will collapse the country.
Yeah, we see. I mean, you see that everywhere. Even in Northern Ireland, they can't have peace sharing.
Yeah. So if you're going to end up with some kind of different regime in Iran, it's going to be the military in some form or the other.
Right.
And the question is, do they bring about a figurehead? A system like Iran requires monarchy. But the problem is that the crown prince, by backing Israeli strikes on Iran, has discredited himself. Nobody likes somebody coming in to rule them with the support of a foreign military power. It's a problem for most people.
Yeah.
Especially given the capability of what will remain of the IRGC to launch an extended insurgency. So simply replacing this regime won't work this way. The regime was entering a state of crisis, and it would have been in a deep crisis after Khamenei dies. And this would have, I think, led to some kind of Iranian-led transition. Peaceful, not peaceful, I don't know. But it was obvious that this regime was exhausted, and it failed. Going to war against it without destroying it will reinvigorate it. I mean, the reason the regime is as strong as it is because Saddam tried to invade. And because they went through this 8-year war, they had to temper their revolutionary zeal with military reality. And therefore, they had to be more pragmatic and more efficient and to fight well enough to keep their territories, which they successfully did in the end.
Yeah.
This is an enormous country with 90 million people. You can't just decapitate the government and expect good things to happen. I mean, much as I hate Parliament today, if they were blown up, this country would fall into chaos.
It's already in chaos, man.
Fine, but it would be bad if there was no government in Britain.
No, I understand.
And that's it would be bad if that were to happen in France or the United States. It's not going to be good if it happens in Iran.
No, I understand.
So just decapitating this regime and getting rid of it without a clear, like, what's your alternative here? Well, we saw Libya. We saw the only moderately successful case has been Syria so far. And that's included a bunch of pogroms and a bunch of murders against civilians and all kinds of atrocities. And that's considered the success relative to what's been happening here because the jihadis were forced to temper over a period of 8 years trapped in Idlib.
We're not going to get stability, are we, in the Middle East?
Not like this. Definitely not like this. So this is why I'm saying this war is a terrible idea. How does any Western country benefit from it? And if none of them benefit from it, why are they participating? Because they are participating.
I don't know, man.
It poses an important question about sovereignty.
Yeah. I'm just, like I say, I'm sick of it. I'm so sick of it.
I understand.
But like, I really do appreciate you coming in and explaining it all to me because it's very complicated and I don't understand it all. And every time I talk to you, I leave with a little bit more knowledge and I drift closer towards wanting to be a bit more Christian.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Just as something to think about rather than thinking about this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Firas, you got a question?
Just one real quick.
Sure.
Regarding drone warfare. What are your future worries? Because it feels like a lot of the friction's being taken away from the decision makers to start war. It's a lot easier to send a fleet of drones than gather thousands of men.
The big thing is that now in Ukraine and in Iran, we've seen the use of civilian assets to launch big volumes of drones. And if you consider the fact that most of the West has no air defense in its strategic locations, in places like refineries, power stations, ports, airports, then you can see how this quickly becomes catastrophic. How drone warfare, just out of the blue, you can have the Chinese position a bunch of container ships and use them to annihilate a bunch of ports and energy facilities and refineries and power stations. And that becomes crippling instantly. So this change is huge, and it means that you need to be investing in air defense. But the West is it's not in a good position to think clearly about its interests and what it needs. Sorry to depress you.
Yeah.
Let's stay on the note where, Peter wants to become more Christian.
As a grounding,
hopefully.
I told you I was raised religious. I don't practice religion, but just something else to think about other than this, because it's so depressing. I'm so fucking sick of it. Anyway, Firas, love to see you. It's great to hear your career is going from strength to strength.
Thank
and
you. A lot of it thanks to your help, man.
Actually, this is Firas has taken the lead of the person who's been on the show the most, right? You're the first 3-person guest.
Whoa. I don't know if that's a good thing.
No, because we call upon you for when crazy shit is happening in the Middle East. You're basically crazy shit in the Middle East. Let's call Firas. That's it, isn't it? Like the other day, it's like Connor was like, we should get Firas on. It's like, already booked, man. Already booked. So a perpetual state of war in the Middle East means a perpetual guest slot for you on the show. But no, listen,
pleasure to be here.
And I'm coming on your show next week.
You are.
Which we're going to talk about more local things and
Absolutely.
UK politics. So I look forward to that, man. Thank you.
Sounds very good.
You as a third appearance, I should allow you to pimp out your business a bit. You provide consultancy and advice for people who want to do business and understand the Middle East. This is why you have such a deep understanding. Where would people go if they wanted more information?
So you can find me on modadgeopolitics.com or on X or on LinkedIn under Firas Modad. I help businesses select their risks and price their risks based on how the Middle East works and what it actually means. But I also help them in places like Mexico or South Africa or
crazy fucking places.
The crazier the better.
Yeah. Okay, we'll stick that on the show notes.
Thank you.
Firas, good to see you, man.
Great to see you.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Sorry, so depressing. Love you all. See you soon. Bye.